the only cure for sick mankind. Mankind is sick in many ways. There's physical ills such as heart disease, cancer, sexually transmitted diseases, tropical plagues, and so forth. For example, AIDS in Africa is prevalent among children and in general. There's mental illnesses such as depression and schizophrenia. There's also moral ills such as addictions, there's sexual immorality, and so on. There's also social ills such as racial prejudice, violence, religious hatreds, political and other forms of corruption, and crime of all sorts. So conditions are worsening in spite of man's well-meant efforts. Now Jesus foretold pangs of distress that would set in with the start of the last days for this system of things. Let's have a look at that, shall we, in Matthew 24, verse 8. That's Matthew 24, verse 8. Now that tells us there, all these things are a beginning of the pangs of distress. So these are just examples of worsening conditions foretold for the last days, such as crime and violence. Now, if you're still in Matthew, let's have a look at verse 12. So that's verse 12 of Matthew 24, and it tells us there, and because of the increasing of lawlessness, the love of a greater number will cool off. Now that actually ties in with 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 3 and 13. Let's have a look at that, shall we? It's 2 Timothy chapter 3, and we're looking at verses 3 and 13. Having no natural affection, not open to any agreement, slanderers, without self-control, fierce, without love of goodness. Verse 13, but wicked men and impostors will advance from bad to worse, misleading and being misled. So the Apostle Paul basically reiterated what Jesus had said in Matthew there. Now, the total number of reported serious crimes in the US alone increased over 1,000% from 1935 to 1980, while the population increased only about 78% during that same period, and crimes continue to climb. Now, human remedies for mankind's ills are ineffective. Considering the scope and destructiveness of the First World War, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch could, with good reason, say, civilization entered on a cruel and perhaps terminal illness in 1914. While visiting Australia, an official of the World Council of Churches said, everyone seems to be looking for some panacea, some cure-all which will guarantee an escape from all our worries. In my third of a century of contact with most of the world, I have not discovered it. And that was in the Sydney Morning Herald. So, pointing to the deep-seated nature of mankind's ills, one newspaper writer observed, the kind of violence we are now experiencing tells us that the mind and heart, the very blood cells of society, are sick. The institutions that hold civilization together are failing. And that was found in the New York Post. So what's the reason for mankind's ills? Well, Jehovah God is a just, wise, almighty, loving creator. All of his works, including man, were made perfect. Now let's have a look at Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4. That's Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4. The rock, perfect in his activity, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness, with whom there is no injustice. Righteous and upright is he. So his purpose for mankind was to enjoy life in paradise and to carry out that divine will. How do we know this? Well, let's have a look at Genesis, right to the beginning of the Bible, in chapter 1. And we're looking at verses 26 to 28. And God went on to say, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And let them have in subjection the fish of the sea, and the flying creatures of the heavens, and the domestic animals of all the earth, and every moving animal that is moving upon the earth." And God proceeded to create the man in his image. In God's image he created him. Male and female he created them. Further, God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and become many, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have in subjection the fish of the sea, and the flying creatures of the heavens, and every living creature that is moving upon the earth." Now let's just move across the page there to chapter 2, verse 15, and it says there, "And Jehovah God proceeded to take the man and settle him in the Garden of Eden, to cultivate it and to take care of it." So that was God's purpose for mankind there, quite clearly stated. But sadly, Satan rebelled, and he induced Adam and Eve to join him. Now, we find this in chapter 3 of Genesis. Let's have a read of verses 1 to 6 of chapter 3. "Now the serpent proved to be the most cautious of all the wild beasts of the field that Jehovah God had made. So he began to say to the woman, 'Is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden?' At this the woman said to the serpent, 'Of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but as for eating of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it, that you do not die.' At this the serpent said to the woman, 'You positively will not die, for God knows that in the very day of your eating from it, your eyes are bound to be opened, and you are bound to be like God, knowing good and bad.' Consequently, the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was something to be longed for to the eyes. Yes, the tree was desirable to look upon. So she began taking of its fruit and eating it. Afterward, she gave some also to her husband when with her, and he began eating it also." So we see the calamity that happened there in the Garden of Eden. So mankind, since subjected to futility and unable to cope with the inherent sin and its ills. Now, when Adam and Eve sinned, that sin was passed on to generations. So let's have a look at Romans chapter 5, verse 12. And this is how. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. "That is why, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because they had all sinned." Now we can marry that up with chapter 8 of Romans, and that's found in verses 20 and 22. So that's Romans chapter 8, verse 20. "For the creation was subjected to futility, not by its own will, but through him that subjected it, on the basis of hope." 22. "For we know that all creation keeps on groaning together and being in pain together until now." So while it is taught that man evolved, scriptures make it clear the opposite. Man was originally a son of God and has degenerated. Archaeologist O.D. Miller observed that the old doctrine of a subsequent decadence, of a sad degeneracy of the human race from an original state of happiness and purity, undoubtedly embodied a great but lamentable truth. Our modern philosophies of history evidently need a new introduction. Now, many ask why God has allowed sorrows to continue. You've probably heard people say that yourself. Let's have a look at Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. So that's Habakkuk. Now it's one of the smaller books before Matthew, and we're looking at chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. How long, O Jehovah, must I cry for help, and you do not hear? How long shall I call to you for aid from violence, and you do not save? Why is it that you make me see what is hurtful, and you keep looking upon mere trouble? And why are despoiling and violence in front of me? And why does quarrelling occur? And why is strife carried? So it's interesting there that even one of God's prophets actually asked the same question. Now, the problem is that rebellion raised the issue of rightfulness and righteousness of Jehovah's universal sovereignty. Turn with me, please, to Isaiah chapter 33, verse 22. So this is Isaiah chapter 33, and we're looking at verse 22. For Jehovah is our judge, Jehovah is our statute giver, Jehovah is our king, he himself will save us. So involved also was the issue of the creatures being able to keep their integrity, as seen from Satan's boast. Now we find that, don't we, in Job chapters 1 and 2. The execution of Satan, Adam and Eve at the time of rebellion, would not have settled the issue raised by Satan. That was because time was needed to prove Satan's boast was false. Let's have a look at Exodus, please, chapter 9, verse 16. Exodus chapter 9, verse 16. But in fact, for this cause I have kept you in existence, for the sake of showing you my power, and in order to have my name declared in all the earth. Are you still behaving haughtily against my people in not sending them away? Here I am causing it to rain down tomorrow about this time a very heavy hail, the like of which has never occurred in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. So also time was needed to let man demonstrate his inability to rule self apart from his maker. Now let's have a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 8 verse 9. So that's Ecclesiastes chapter 8 verse 9. So that tells us, all this I have seen, and there was an applying of my heart to every work that has been done under the sun. During that time that man has dominated man to his injury. And isn't that right? So we can also marry that up with Jeremiah's words in chapter 10, verse 23. So that's Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23. I well know, O Jehovah, that to earthling man his way does not belong. It does not belong to man who is walking, even to direct his step. And don't we see that in society today? Now, God's kingdom is the promised cure for sick mankind. Adam's sin lost life rights for self and his descendants, because all are imperfect and none is able to restore those rights. Let's have a look at Psalm 49 verses 7 to 9. That's Psalm 49 verses 7 to 9. Not one of them can by any means redeem even a brother, nor give to God a ransom for him. And the redemption price of their soul is so precious that it has ceased to time indefinite, that he should still live forever and not see the pit. So there's a legal basis for forgiving sin provided in Christ's ransom sacrifice. Now we find this, don't we, in Matthew 20 verse 28. That's Matthew 20 verse 28. just as the Son of Man came not to be ministered to, but to minister and to give his soul a ransom in exchange for many. And we can also compare that with Romans chapter 3, verse 25. Romans 3:25. God set him forth as an offering for propitiation through faith in his blood. This was in order to exhibit his own righteousness, because he was forgiving the sins that occurred in the past, while God was exercising forbearance. And we can just move on to 26 where it says, so as to exhibit his own righteousness in this present season, that he might be righteous even when declaring righteous the man that has faith in Jesus. So Jesus, having God as his Father, was perfect and he was sinless. He surrendered his perfect life for benefit of all those who exercise faith. Does the Bible tell us this? Well, yes, it does, because let's have a look at 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. That's 1 John, towards the back of your Bible there. And we're looking at chapter 3, verse 16. By this we have come to know love, because for one who surrendered his soul for us, and we are under obligation to surrender our souls for our brothers. So Jesus rewarded for integrity keeping by being made king of God's kingdom. Mankind's cure is to be by means of that kingdom mentioned soon after Adam's sin. Now this is where we find the first prophecy recorded in the Bible, and you'll find it in Genesis chapter 3. So it's Genesis chapter 3, and it's verse 15. This is the very first prophecy in the Bible. And I shall put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He will bruise you in the head, and you will bruise him in the heel. So that promised seed was to come through Abraham, Judah and David. Now if we just move on there to Genesis chapter 22. That's Genesis chapter 22, and we're looking at verses 17 and 18. I shall surely bless you, and I shall surely multiply your seed like the stars of the heavens, and like the grains of the sand that are on the seashore. And your seed will take possession of the gate of his enemies. And by means of your seed, all nations of the earth will certainly bless themselves due to the fact that you have listened to my voice. So that was God's words to Abraham there. Now we can also look at chapter 49, verse 10. Just a few pages on there. So chapter 49, verse 10. Now that tells us, the scepter will not turn aside from Judah, neither the commander's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him the obedience of the peoples will belong. And we can also again marry that up with 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. This is where we see David's involvement here. So that's 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. When your days come to the full, and you must lie down with your forefathers, then I shall certainly raise up your seed after you, which will come out of your inward parts, and I shall indeed firmly establish his kingdom. So that was God's words there to David as well. So Solomon's reign foreshadowed the Messiah's rule as well. So let's have a look at 1 Kings chapter 4, 25. That's 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 25. Now that tells us, and Judah and Israel continue to dwell in security, everyone under his own vine and under his own fig tree. from Dan to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So we can see there that seed and how it progressed through that lineage there. Now, many prophecies pointed to this kingdom, and if we look at Psalm 2, we'll have a look at that, shall we? Starting from verse 1, it says, "Why have the nations been in tumult? Have the national groups themselves kept muttering an empty thing? The kings of earth take their stand, and high officials themselves have massed together as one, against Jehovah and against his anointed one, saying, Let us tear their bands apart, and cast their cords away from us. The very one sitting in the heavens will laugh. Jehovah himself will hold them in derision. At that time he will speak to them in his anger, and in his hot displeasure he will disturb them, saying, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Let me refer to the decree of Jehovah. He has said to me, You are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask of me that I may give nations as your inheritance, and the ends of the earth as your own possession. You will break them with an iron scepter, as though a potter's vessel you will dash them to pieces. And now, O kings, exercise insight. Let yourselves be corrected, O judges of the earth. Serve Jehovah with fear, and be joyful with trembling. Kiss the Son, that he may not become incensed, and you may not perish from the way. For his anger flares up easily. Happy are all those taking refuge in him." And we also find similar accounts in chapter 45 and 110. Now, there's also the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, let's have a look at Matthew chapter 6, verse 10. Matthew chapter 6, verse 10. Now, we probably well know that the most famous prayer here was probably ever given, and that was given by Jesus himself. And he says there, to let your kingdom come, let your will take place as in heaven, also upon earth. So he's talking about that kingdom there, of which that seed belonged. And so that was also the testimony of Apostle Paul as well. Now, if we just return to Romans chapter 8, so that's Romans chapter 8, and we're looking at verses 20 and 21. For the creation was subjected to futility, not by its own will, but by through him that subjected it on the basis of hope, that the creation itself also will be set free from enslavement to corruption and have the glorious freedom of the children of God. And we can also marry that up with 1 Corinthians chapter 15. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And we'll look at verses 24, 25 and 28. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 24, 25 and 28. Next at the end, when he stands over the kingdom to his God and Father, when he has brought to nothing all government and all authority and power, for he must rule as king until God has put all enemies under his feet. 28. But when all things will have been subjected to him, and the Son himself will also subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him, that God may be all things to everyone. So Jehovah's word, it cannot fail. Now let's have a look at Isaiah chapter 55. This is why we can certainly say that Jehovah's word cannot fail in any way whatsoever. Now it's Isaiah 55 verses 10 and 11. For just as the pouring rain descends and the snow from the heavens and does not return to that place, unless it actually saturates the earth and makes it produce and sprout, and seed is actually given to the sower and bread to the eater. Verse 11, so my word that goes forth from my mouth will prove to be. It will not return to me without results, but it will certainly do that in which I have delighted, and it will have certain success in that for which I have sent it. Very, very comforting words there. Now, Jehovah's acts paved the way to mankind's cure, and it's that what makes those words we just read comforting. Now, Jehovah God is certain to act because his name is involved. From Exodus through to Ezekiel, over 70 times God says, "They shall know that I am Jehovah." Peace and well-being of mankind depend on the sanctification of God's name. To cure mankind, then, Jehovah must eliminate all foes of God and man. Jehovah God executed the wicked in ancient times. For example, there was the time of the flood, as you probably well know about. And then there was also the wicked Sodom and Gomorrah that were also executed. Unfaithful Jerusalem was destroyed twice, both in 607 BCE and 70 CE. And it foreshadowed a future destruction of the wicked during the Great Tribulation. Let's have a look at that, shall we, in Luke 21, verses 25 to 27. Luke chapter 21, and it's verses 25 to 27. Also there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and on the earth anguish of nations not knowing the way out because of the roaring of the sea and its agitation. While men became faint out of fear and expectation of the things coming upon the inhabited earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But as for these things start to occur, raise yourselves erect and lift your heads up, because your deliverance is getting near. John foretold that the Babylon the Great, of a world empire of false religion, would be the first to go in that great tribulation. Let's have a look at Revelation chapter 17. That's Revelation chapter 17, and we're looking at verses 5, 16 and 17. So from verse 5 then, and upon her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and of the disgusting things of the earth. So we identify Babylon the Great there, don't we? Now verses 16 and 17. And the 10 horns that you saw, and the wild beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her devastated and naked, and will eat up her fleshy parts, and will completely burn her with fire. For God put it into their hearts to carry out his thought, even to carry out their one thought by giving their kingdom to the wild beast, until the words of God will have been accomplished. And the woman whom you saw means the great city that has a kingdom over the kings of the earth. Now, is that where it ends? No, because other parts of Satan's world is to follow. Let's just turn over a page to chapter 19 of Revelation, and we're going to look at verses 11 to 21. And I saw the heaven opened, and look, a white horse, and the one seated upon it is called Faithful and True, and he judges and carries on war in righteousness. His eyes are a fiery flame, and upon his head are many diadems. He has a name written that no one knows but he himself. And he is arrayed with an outer garment sprinkled with blood, and the name he is called is the Word of God. Also the armies that were in heaven were following him on white horses, and they were clothed in white, clean, fine linen. And out of his mouth there protrudes a sharp long sword, that he may strike the nations with it, and he will shepherd them with a rod of iron. He treads too the winepress of the anger of the wrath of God the Almighty. And upon his outer garment, even upon his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So we see there, don't we, that the political element, the nations, as it were, is going to also be involved with that. Now, what is important to remember is that that time is at hand. The present world conditions threatens man's existence. The fulfillment of Bible prophecies point to our day, and we saw that, didn't we, in Matthew 24 and also in Luke 21 just now. Now, Jesus Christ and the 144,000 associates will rule 1,000 years. Where do we find this in the Bible? Well, it can be found in Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 and 3. That's Revelation 14, verse 1 and 3. And I saw and look the Lamb standing upon the Mount Zion, that be Jesus, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. Verse 3. And they are singing as if a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one was able to master that song of 144,000 who have been bought from the earth. So they will restore mankind to that mental, physical, spiritual and moral perfection. Let's have a look at Revelation chapter 21, verses 3 and 4. With that, I heard a loud voice from the throne say, Look, the tent of God is with mankind, and he will reside with them, and they will be his peoples. And God himself will be with them, and he will wipe out every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more, neither will mourning, nor outcry, nor pain be any more. The former things have passed away. They're very comforting words, aren't they, for us today? Now let's marry that up with Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9. So that's Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9. They will not do any harm or cause any ruin in all the holy mountain, because the earth will certainly be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah, as the waters are covering the very sea. Another thing to remember is that all those who are dead will be raised from those in the memorial tombs, or those in God's memory. Now, where do we find that in the Bible? John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. Now, if you know somebody who's close to you who has been lost in death, then you should think about these people as you're reading through these verses here. Do not marvel at this, because the hour is coming in which all those in the memorial tombs will hear his voice and come out. Those who did good things to a resurrection of life, those who practiced vile things to a resurrection of judgment. Very interesting. Now we can compare that with Acts chapter 24, verse 15. That's Acts 24, verse 15. And I have hope toward God, which hope these men themselves also entertain, that there is going to be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. So that's very, very clear there, isn't it? That there's going to be a resurrection. Now, the last enemy, death, is also to be destroyed. Let's have a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 25 and 26. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 25-26. For he must rule as king until God has put all enemies under his feet. As the last enemy, death is to be brought to nothing. So they're very comforting words as well, aren't they? I'm sure you'll agree. Now, we can be getting the benefits of that spiritual cure right now. We need to take in accurate Bible knowledge. We need to bring our life in line with God's righteous requirements. And we need to seek meekness and seek righteousness. We need to worship the Creator, Jehovah God, and we will benefit considerably. So what have we learnt here? Well, we don't need anybody to tell us that mankind is sick and it's destroying itself on a daily basis. But we've known that there is a remedy here. There's a remedy that is about to take place. We've also seen that there's a reason for mankind's ills, haven't we? We looked in Genesis there, didn't we? And we saw Jehovah's original purpose for humankind and for the earth, but how it was destroyed by Satan and Adam and Eve. But we've also seen how God's kingdom is going to be the remedy for what Satan and Adam and Eve had done. We've also seen that Jehovah's acts paves the way to mankind's cure. We had examples there of the flood during Noah's time and Sodom and Gomorrah, and how he's going to destroy the wicked today. But we've also seen that we can get the benefits of a spiritual cure now. So, are you putting your faith in the only cure for sick mankind? If you would like a free home Bible study at a time and place to suit you, please navigate your browser to jw.org and follow the links online. Thank you for listening.